And we're back. And Bobbie, today we're going to visit around Tommy Rickman, who I guarantee you most people have no idea who that is, but I am pretty sure a lot of folks know his work. So tell us about Tom Rickman.
Probably Tom Rickman, Tommy Rickman, as he was known by his friends in the Sharpe community. Tom grew up in Sharpe. He was graduated from North Marshall High School in 1957. So that'll give you a time frame as to when he was born. He was probably around 17 or 18 years old when he graduated from high school. I think he was 1940, maybe he was born. Yes, because he was 6 years younger than I. So he's born in 1940. He was the son of Marshall and Colleen Rickman. And the little house where he grew up in Sharpe, a few hundred feet, set back a few hundred feet off US Highway 68, and went to Sharpe School, grade school, elementary school, and Sharpe High School until it was merged or consolidated with Calvert City High School when Tom was a sophomore. And he went to North Marshall as a sophomore in that year, the fall of 1954 is when that would have been. Well, Tom called that a turning point in his life, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later. But Tom Rickman was among the movie going people and who made the movies. Tom was pretty well known because he was the writer of the screenplay Coal Miner's Daughter. That was probably one of his more famous movies. Tom was a screenwriter. He talked about the turning point in his life being in high school, because he said when he went to North Marshall, that everything was new, nothing was organized, and he said he simply lost interest in everything. He said he didn't know how he got out of high school. Now this is a gentleman who later became a writer of some of the more well-known movies, such as I think the last movie he made was Tuesdays with Morrie, and that was a screenplay of a book that had been written. But anyway, he was also a director. He directed movies. I happened to have been lucky enough to have been on the set of one of the movies he made here in Marshall County, and was premiered in Paducah. The name of that movie, that was one of his movies made he wrote it and he directed it in the 1980s. And so, but going back to Tom, how Tom got to be a movie writer. He lost interest in high school in everything. He said he didn't know how he would have gotten out. There were two teachers at North Marshall High School. One was an English teacher and one was a history teacher. And he said it had not been for those two women, he probably would not have gotten out of high school. Well, he did. He graduated in 1957. And after that, he spent about 3 years finding his niche in life. He worked at the John Green store as a sales clerk in stores and department stores. John Green was a men and women's clothing store. And probably, I think they had some other, sold some other things, but it was a store in Paducah when the downtown is where you went to do all your shopping, household shopping, clothing shopping, and that sort of thing. After the department stores, such as the community department stores, such as here in Calvert City, Luther Draffen's, after marketing moved away from those local department stores, well, Paducah's where you went. Well, John Green was a store there. Tom worked 10 months there after he graduated from high school and joined the Marine Corps. He spent a 3-year tour of duty in the U.S. Marine Corps, and after he got out of the Marine Corps, apparently he had matured somewhat and decided that he needed to take advantage of the GI Bill. He enrolled at Murray State University to study journalism, and he graduated from Murray State in 1965. But before graduating, he won a fellowship to the University of Illinois at Champaign to do graduate work in English. So he went to the University of Illinois, and he was getting his doctorate, and he had performed. He had passed. He said with flying colors, and he was so proud of that because he didn't feel like he had been a very good high school student, and that he had passed all of his tests, his oral exams, and that sort of thing. And he was in the middle of his dissertation, and he was offered an opportunity to go with the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. Well, while at the University of Illinois, he had become interested in theater, and he and some other students had formed a theater group, and they had made a few films, and some of the short films that he had made there, they were getting good reviews. So he stops in the middle of his dissertation at the University of Illinois and goes to Los Angeles and becomes a part of the American Film Institute. Well, he spent some time there, and while there, he made a short film called "What Fixed Me," and that's when I got to know Tom. Even though he grew up at Sharpe and went to school at North Marshall, as I said, he was 6 years younger, and I had a couple of sisters who went to high school with him, but he wasn't a person who stood out in high school, as he explained. And but after he made this short film, "What Fixed Me," it was shown on the local television here, and I saw it, and people were talking about it, just word of mouth. Well, Tom Rickman, okay, a local man made good. Marshall and Colleen Rickman, well, I knew of them, but didn't know the family well. So I called, someone told me that Tom was visiting with his parents, and after this movie was shown. Now, this movie was fairly hard hitting. It would stimulate your emotions. It was about a mother and a young boy who were and a overly religious father, and the young man and the overly religious father didn't get along very well, and the mother was having emotional struggles trying to free herself and her son from the tyranny of an overly religious father, and failing to do so. And so this movie was shot in the Sharpe Elva community, and local citizens were the stars of this short movie, and that it brought me to tears when I saw it on the local television station. And so that's why when people were talking about it, that I wanted to interview Tom. So I called his mother, and Colleen just handed the phone to Tom, and we set up a time to go interview him. And that was the first time that I had met Tom and interviewed him. That was in 1974. And I did an article for the Tribune Courier. I was working at the Tribune Courier at that time, and I did an article for the Tribune Courier. Actually, I interviewed the whole family: Marshall, Colleen, Tom, and his first wife, who was Kate Hawley. Kate Hawley was an actress, and she was at that time, you may remember the series The Senator with Hal Holbrook. She was Hal Holbrook's secretary in that series, and she also did some other film work. She had at the same time she had a television news program at the same time in LA at that time. She really, her career, Kate's career, was probably at a higher point than Tom's was at that point. But Tom was after this short movie, it won several film festival awards. And after this short movie, then he was being looked at by the film industry as an up-and-coming screenwriter. So I interviewed Tom, and he talked about some of the things that he was working on, and what he hoped to do, and told me about his background. And he told me all this gave me all this information about his background and the problems he had in high school, and then about going into the Marine Corps, and after coming out of the Marine Corps, feeling like he needed to make a living for himself doing something. So journalism, he always had interest in journalism. Tom was a sensitive man and soft-spoken. Uh, and interested in what why people do what they do, and what prompts someone like that overly religious man to be and do the things that he did, and also the reaction of the wife and the son. And he was interested in the so-called human condition, and I found that to be such an interesting interview with such an interesting person. And as I said, the interview was with all four of them, but the story wound up being about Tom and what he had done and was about to do. And then the next time I interviewed him a time or two after that, but not anything particular. I just touched base with him when he was home or something, like stayed in touch with him from time to time. And then the next thing I know, Tom Rickman had written such movies as Hooper, The Laughing Policeman. Hooper, I believe, was it Burt Reynolds that starred in that along with Raquel Welch. And so he was as I said, an up and coming screenwriter. Well, we see the credits when we go to a movie. We see the credits, but we don't think much about the writer. We're thinking about the stars. The headliners are the stars, not the writer or the director. But now Tom had done some acting himself while he was at the University of Illinois. So, and he told me at that time he'd like to do more of that sort of work. Don't think he ever did, but he did. He really wanted to direct, and he already had in mind some things he wanted to do. One would have being the making a trip down the Mississippi River, a Huck Finn type movie. And I'll tell you about that, because that was the movie that he invited me to bring one of my reporters and spend the day on the set. On the set was the Clarks River, close to Reedland, so that was a fun event. But anyway, the next thing I know, he has written the script for Coal Miner's Daughter, and that was 1980, I believe. Well, that was such a hit that the writer was getting the script writer was getting some tension, especially in his hometown. And Tom Rickman Day was declared for the 4th of July, 1980. And this movie was not really supposed to be a blockbuster, but it's more successful at the box office than were some of the those that were supposed to be blockbusters. Such, I believe, Midway was one of the blockbusters. I believe that was a war movie. I never saw it, but anyway, that one, and maybe there was a film about General MacArthur that was supposed to be or maybe it was Patton. Which was it? Do you remember yours?
I believe that was General Patton.
Okay.
And we might want to explain, because we both have connections, being from Kentucky, who the Coal Miner's Daughter was.
The Coal Miner's Daughter was country music queen Loretta Lynn, who had grown up in a place known as Butcher Holler in eastern Kentucky. And Tom, and some of the scenes were shot in Kentucky. Several $1 million payroll came into Letcher County.
Yes.
And for the shooting of that film. So, and Tom at that time had been made a member of the Kentucky Film Commission, and he talked about that. But I covered the Tom Rickman Day, and Lieutenant Governor Martha Lane Collins was there. Senator Wendell Ford was there. There were any number of high-level government officials, as well as the county and state officials there. A big crowd, local people, as well as the entire Rickman family. Well, by that time, Tom and his wife had a little girl, Megan Rickman. They were all, I don't remember, no, Kate did not come to that. Kate was at home. I believe they had a 2-year-old son, and I think Megan was 4, possibly 5 at that time. And his parents were still living, and everybody were at the Sheriff's Boys and Girls Ranch at Gilbertsville for this Tom Rickman Day. And it was a fun day. I did did 2 stories and did a full page display with photographs of Tom talking with different people. There was a songwriter there, a country songwriter, not for the Loretta Lynn movie, but a gentleman who had moved to Western Kentucky and wrote a song called the Marshall County Line. And he was there. He and his band, his name was Mark Collier. He and his band were there and performed at that particular. I lost contact with Mark, so I really don't know how well he did in the music business, but he was an excellent performer. Anyway, after that, I did see Coal Miner's Daughter, and I thought that was a marvelous movie. Tom talked about movie trends, what the trends were going to be, and that he saw in the future. He foresaw that movies were going to probably become less places that you go to in a theater, but more that you watched at home on your television set. He predicted there were going to be movies made specifically for television, and not really concerned that theaters were all going to close, but that maybe the blockbusters, the money making movies were going to be the ones that you go to the theaters to see, and maybe the movies that were deemed by the powers that be in the Hollywood community would be the television movies. And he also predicted that the Kentucky Film Commission would have great influence on promoting Kentucky as having sites for movies to be made. And it was fairly successful in its early years. I don't think the Film Commission has been so prominent in the last, say, the last 20 years. But anyway, those were some of the things that Tom foresaw. Some of them came to be and some of them didn't, of course. And he talked about movies being a marriage, he called it, between art and commerce. And he said movies are art. Movies are constantly changing, but the one thing that doesn't change is they are an art married to commerce. And for that reason, a movie must be commercially successful in order to for the producer, the company, to continue making movies. The producers, the company that makes the film, the directors, they have to make some money out from it. It has to be a success at the box office. People have to want to go see it and pay money to see it. And so that was why he called it a marriage between art and commerce. And he recognized the importance of the commerce side, but he was the art.
Did you get the sense of feel that he drew from his culture and his growing up, the culture of Western Kentucky and growing up? Was that the basis of a lot of his work?
Oh yes, absolutely. That was the basis of the movie that he talked about wanting to write, and he'd had this in his head for years, he said. And it turned out to be The River Rat, with Tommy Lee Jones, Martha Plimpton, Sean Smith, a little boy from Paducah. They were the stars of this particular movie. Of course, Tommy Lee Jones being the starring attraction, and Martha Plimpton was coming on in her own right as she was a young girl. But the basis of that story was Tommy Lee Jones portrayed a convict who had just been paroled from prison, and he was meeting a teenage daughter that he had never known. And for some reason, I'm not sure that I remember what the reason was, that this younger boy, African-American boy from Paducah, who played, don't remember the name of the character he played, but for some reason, the three of them, his daughter, this little boy, they were on this boat called the River Rat, and they were going down the Mississippi River, a la Mark Twain, Huck Finn style. And the the emotional story between the father getting to know a teenage daughter now that who had been born and grown up while he was in prison. That was the focus of the story, and of course this adventure going down the river. And so part of it, he wanted to shoot it in Western Kentucky. Shot some of it in Western Kentucky, some of it in Memphis, and of course there were other sites that movie. And he invited me to bring a reporter, and this was in 1983. He was shooting this movie, and bring a reporter and come down and spend the day with him on the Clarks River, which I did. And he was fascinating to watch work. Didn't know you were there when he was directing this movie. He was involved in what was happening on that set constantly and all the time. When he took a break, he was Tom Rickman, good old boy from Marshall County, Kentucky, but he didn't take many breaks. The people, of course, the actors, everybody needed a break. And we spent the day there and talked to people who were there, and we wrote stories for the Tribune about it. And then a year later, he had that movie premiered in Paducah, and he brought there again. He brought his daughter and his mother, and I don't believe Marshall was there at that time. I'm not sure Marshall had passed on, or if he just wasn't feeling well, wasn't able to be at the premiere. But he may have been there. I just didn't see Marshall at the premiere. And I don't remember when he passed on, what year it was. But anyway, it was a large crowd in Paducah. It was premiered at the Arcade Theater in Paducah, and large crowd, huge crowd there. People came out. Tom was the star as well as Tommy Lee. Tom was the star among local people. Let's put it that way.
Mhm. So, when you think back to people like Tom and other people that you have interviewed that have become nationally known,
Yes.
what would you say is the commonality amongst the people that don't ever seem to forget where they come from?
Oh, they are who they are always. Their personality doesn't change. They don't become carried away with themselves, ego-driven, I suppose. Tom was not ego-driven. He was just a good old friendly boy. And that's the common thread that I have found with most people who have gone on to important positions, and not necessarily just from Western Kentucky, but from other regions as well. There are those who have gone on to become famous that may have gone to their head, so to speak. They may have become ego-driven, but I don't recall interviewing those people. If I did, and I probably did, over a 50-odd year period, I probably have interviewed some of those people. But the common thread among the people that I have interviewed that were from this region, not necessarily just Western Kentucky, but let's say from the South, that's the common thread. They are not ego-driven.
I'm really curious as to, having been in journalism for 54 years and having interviewed, I'm sure, politicians and CEOs and activists and you name it. What was your experience in terms of when you think of someone like Tom Rickman, who by all means, certainly, I'm sure, was financially successful. He certainly was successful in his art. He was successful as a producer and as a director. What is it that allows them, or what is it that keeps them tied to our culture? Because you've made an observation here that I too have seen, that people like that somehow or some way, they never quite um, ever forget, the importance of the people that grew up with the two teachers,
Yeah,
that literally saved him in terms of in his world. How is it that in our culture in the South, do you think, based upon your experience with all the interviews you've done, that people maintain those ties?
I think it's deliberate. I think they maintain those ties because that many of them expect to return here and spend their latter days here, and many of them do. Some do not. Tom did not, of course, but I'm not sure had he lived longer that he would not have. Although he
Mhm.
was married and had a second, he and his first wife, I think, were divorced in 1978, or maybe it was 1988. I don't remember for sure. But anyway, he had married a second time, and I'm not sure if he had children with his second wife or not. The last time I talked person to person with Tom was the fall of 2003. He was home. Both his parents had passed on by that time, and he was but home. The family still owned the little white house down at Sharpe, and I'm not sure if it's still in the family or not. But uh, I suppose he and his sister owned it at that time, and he was home for a school reunion. He was home for a school reunion. Even though he didn't have a real good high school experience, he came home for that North Marshall high school reunion. And to uh, they don't lose I think I have always thought we are a combination. Our character is a combination of all the people who have had input into our lives, such as our parents, not just our parents, but our parents, our teachers, our close friends. And we don't, as we grow older, we don't want to lose contact with those people. Not completely. We go on somewhere else and do something else, or many of us do, but we don't want to lose contact. We want those ties to remain.
Absolutely. I've always found it fascinating. Kay and I, of course, have traveled all across the United States, and there's something very evident from the South to the West to the North. The cultures, even though there may be, let's say, Irish American on my dad's side, Native American on my mother's side. You go to the North and you visit with people and you work with people, and they find out you're Scotch Irish, and they'll say, oh, well, you need to go over to this neighborhood. But in the South, we don't seem to have neighborhoods. We seem to have large communities of people.
Yes, yes.
Every time I experienced that when I was traveling, it was great. I mean, I love to go to Chinatown. I love to go over to the German area, all the different foods and varieties and cultures. But in the South, it's almost like would the term be homogenous? We just kind of all blend in together.
I think so. I think we have a commonality.
Yeah,
There's a common thread that binds us together. I think I just think there's something that that ties us together. And I don't know that I can really I can't really identify it. I don't think it's just something that's there in our psyche.
Well, and if you think about it in terms of people like Tommy as a writer, and you look at other Southern writers, they all seem to draw from the culture.
They do. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That must have been a remarkable set of interviews.
It was. I interviewed him. Well, I interviewed him several different times after that, but those were the interviews that stood out there. I talked to him at different times. He'd call me sometimes, just not for an interview, just to say hi, just to maintain a contact. Why, I don't really know, but he did. And I mean, one day I was sitting in Paducah Sun one afternoon, Paducah Sun office, and got a phone call. It was Tom Rickman.
See,
Just
isn't it interesting though, because for some reason that would happen amongst this us in the South. You
Yeah.
know, I'm curious, did when you were down on the set of The River Rat, did you have an opportunity to interview any of the stars?
We never, no, not really. Tom and the producer, the people running this, they kept that was a working day, and they kept the stars. The stars really didn't have the time. The stars, when they were not shooting, they were reviewing their lines, or they were or taking a break, and maybe having a sandwich, or drinking a Coke or something like that. They were taking a period of just a break to get ready for the next shooting. So they were protected on while they were at that was the set, and they were on the set. They were protected. We did get Tommy Lee Jones would never wasn't interviewed by anyone that I can recall. I don't think the Sun got an interview with him, but we got an interview. I didn't, but one of my reporters got an interview with his wife. And she did a beautiful story on Tommy Lee Jones' wife. They had rented a house on the lake, and it was she wrote a very interesting story. And we didn't push Tommy Lee Jones. If he didn't want to talk to us, well, okay. And didn't ask Tom to pressure him into anything like that. It just did. If someone doesn't want to be interviewed, okay.
Yeah. What about the young man that played that was on the boat with him? Is he still around Paducah? Did he go on to be a
You know,
star?
I lost complete contact with that young man, and Martha Plimpton also. I do not know. I don't know whether he went on to become an actor. I think the young he was a preteen. He was a child at the time, but I think maybe he had ambitions, or he wouldn't have accepted the role. I think maybe he had ambitions, but to my knowledge, I don't recall having seen him in anything else other than The River Rat, and I don't remember hearing anything more about him.
So I'm curious, when you were on the set, were you surprised at the number of people it takes to make a movie?
Sort of, yeah. And yes, I knew that it did take a number of people. I was surprised at the number of people who were just sitting back on the bank, just wait. Those were extras. They're
Mhm,
just waiting for when they might be needed. And
mhm.
maybe they would be needed that day, and maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they just sit there. The women, some of the women were knitting and or doing some other things, reading, some of them reading. They were uh, just there.
I thought it's interesting what Tommy said about the future of movies. And of course, now,
Yes.
if you stop and reflect on that, we have things like the Lifetime Network is all made for TV movies.
Oh, sure.
All of them have a central plot, you know,
Sure. Sure.
and over and over. In fact, I sometimes laugh about it. You pretty much know how it's going to come out in the end. And yet the real creative types of movies, in my opinion, people like Tommy, who wrote about real people,
Yes.
Loretta Lynn being the daughter of Kentucky, you don't
Yes.
see a lot of that anymore. Did he have concerns about the fact that those types of stories were being kind of moved away because they were not the most money-making stories to be on film?
He did, but at the same time, he felt that they would always exist in some form. He knew that movies had to change because of changing technology. Technology was at the bottom of at the chain, as well as the commercial interest. And he knew that there would always be change, but he had some concern, but he still felt that those human interest stories, people stories, and he talked about spinoffs. He felt like would be spinoffs of the Loretta Lynn family stories. He talked about that he felt there would be, because of the Loretta Lynn story, there would be more family stories. Well, there were some, but and then he talked about that spinoffs are not usually as successful as the original, because for various reasons. And he talked about the fact that some blockbusters are not successful. He said if it is not well written, well acted, and produced, that's three strikes against it before it is presented to an audience.
You
And
know, you made an observation. I'd be really curious as to what the status is of the Kentucky Film Commission. Back in 1986, I believe it was, or so, I was in a group called Leadership Kentucky, which has gone on
yes,
to be
yes.
a program in the state. And one of the people that was a speaker there at that time was Ned Beatty,
Okay.
who is a kind of a character actor. And I had the opportunity, a very approachable guy, very friendly, very Southern. And so I asked him, I said, because he just seemed to pop up in movie after movie after movie. And I said, you know, Mr. Beatty, this must be exhausting work. And he said, well, it is. He said, but, you know, I have so many kids, I have to do this. But I love doing what I have to do. And I've always found it fascinating that I've what few movie stars I've ever met that if they were approachable and you talk to them, they are people just doing a job, you know.
Yes,
And I
yes,
know Tom was doing a job, but he was also practicing his art. And I
he
just
was.
always
Yes.
admire people like that.
I think he enjoyed life. I think he enjoyed life very much, but he also enjoyed coming home. He
Yeah.
he loved coming home. Tommy, one thing he talked about that you might be interested in, he said so many of the people in Hollywood, the movie industry people, are second and third generation uh, people from Hollywood. And he would be told often by some of these people that he worked with daily, um, you are so lucky that you are from somewhere, being from somewhere. They were from Los Angeles or Southern California or California, uh, some part of California. Most of these people, uh, the, throughout the industry, from the stars to whoever the support people were, they
Mhm.
were the vast majority were from Southern California, from Hollywood, Los Angeles, and that vicinity. So, but they would tell him, "You are so lucky to be from somewhere."
Interesting.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So,
And
and Tommy,
he came to realize that he was fortunate to be from somewhere.
and could reconnect,
Yes, yes.
to come back and reconnect. And Tommy passed away when?
September 3rd, 2018.
Was it
Right.
unexpected?
No, he had cancer. I had not been in contact. I did not know he had cancer. I had lost contact with him 3, 4 years earlier. Just don't know why. He hadn't been home for one thing, and he hadn't called me. I hadn't called him. Um, I think email was just coming into being, and I think I had email. I had an email address, but then the last email I didn't get a response to, but I didn't think anything about it. You know, I knew he was busy. I think it was 1999 that he did the. Was it 99 that he? No, 2003 did the. That may have been his last movie, Tuesdays with Morrie. But anyway, it was a surprise to me, and that it happened in a sort of a strange way, Daryl. I was just thinking about him, so I googled it. Came up on the Hollywood Reporter that he had died, and his friend and fellow writer, his name was Nicholas Meyer, had posted on Facebook that Tommy had died on this was the 5th of September. He had died on Monday. He was 78. He had cancer, and this Meyer fellow just mentioned that he had battled cancer for several years. And this man talked about that when apparently this man was older than Tom, and he said when he came to when Tom came to Hollywood, he became the hottest thing in town. And he said he was jealous, but then he was so jealous of the attention that Tom was getting that, but soon they became best of friends because Tom was such a personable person.
That's a great tribute.
It is indeed.
Really is. Well, thank you, Bobbie.
You
I
are most welcome. I've enjoyed talking with you.